2020 who has not been surrounded by political and personal scandal. The only candidate not accused of sexual misconduct.
Yeah.
An astonishing statement in itself.
No kidding.
The only candidate committed to eliminating the federal debt by first auditing the Federal Reserve and then ending its hawkish predatory practices.
Yeah.
Leaving our great-grandchildren with our bills to pay. The only candidate who will simultaneously defend your right to bear arms, keep you out of jail for victimless crimes, reduce federal spending, protect civil rights, shrink the size of our government, and end our world police force, and do her part to keep the government off of our backs. Please put your hands together, because it is my great pleasure to introduce to you the next President of the United States, Dr. Joe Jorgenson.
Yeah! Woo! Yeah! Yeah!
Hi, thank you so much for coming out, and thank you for having such a gorgeous day for me here. So again, not far from where I stand today, there's a monument built to remember the Berlin Wall. Throughout the Cold War, millions of Americans, or rather millions of people, were killed, and millions more were wounded in multiple proxy fights between the US and the Soviet Union. By the time the wall fell, the USSR was dissolved. Many Americans thought that the era of endless conflict had come to an end. Sadly, so many of the same failures have been repeated over and over in the Middle East. It's horrifying how many lives have been needlessly lost in battle in the last 50 years alone. Any American born in 1980 or later has spent at least half their life in a nation at war. And what has been the reward for the billions of dollars and millions of lives lost? When American soldiers were told that they were fighting to defend our freedom, a system which taxes and spends us into bankruptcy was not what any of those military recruits could have had in mind, let alone a government which spies on our phone records and computers and uses indefinite fears of terror, quote unquote terror, to curb our civil liberties every day at our borders and in our airports. I'd like to start by telling you about my grandmother, who gave me the love of my country. And she's the reason I'm here today. Growing up, she said, you just don't know what the old country was like, because she was an immigrant. And she explained that in the old country, it didn't matter how much you worked. It didn't matter if you took a second or third job, that everybody had the same amount, because the government basically took away all of the extra. And listening to her today, it kind of sounds like she would be from the Soviet Union or from a Eastern Bloc country. Actually, she was from Denmark, and unfortunately our country is becoming more and more like Denmark. It was her vision of liberty and the basic principles of the Libertarian Party that bring me here today. Now, you saw the bus we've been traveling around in. We've been crisscrossing the country, and everywhere I go, people say the same thing, that the old system just isn't working. So rather than waiting for politicians to fix this, especially when they cause it to begin with, I think that you know best what's best for you. And that's why I'm asking for your vote for President of the United States.
Yeah! You got it!
Thank you. As your president, I will get government out of the way so my grandmother's vision of the American dream can be a reality for us all. Our current government is too big, too bossy, too nosy, too intrusive. And what gives them the right? We need to put the decision-making power back into your hands, because you know best how to spend your money better than any special interest lobbyist or bureaucrat in Washington can. Americans would never budget to spend $80 billion a year to keep families apart from their loved ones, but that's exactly what our government does with its prison system. We cannot claim to be the land of the free when we lead the world in incarcerations.
Yep.
We have 5% of the world's population, but house 20% of its prisoners. And one of the biggest factors that led to a quadrupling of the prison population since 1980 is the racist and destructive war on drugs.
Yep.
In particular, mandatory minimums have taken discretion out of the hands of judges and had forced them to have mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters locked up for 10, 20 years, sometimes even for life, for a supposed crime in which there is no victim. All we have to do is take a step back to Prohibition era to see the parallels. Despite realizing how poorly alcohol prohibition went, what we have right now is a carbon copy. Drug kingpins have replaced mob bosses, and drug dens have replaced speakeasies. When was the last time you heard of a liquor store owner going up and down the halls of a high school trying to push gin on high school students? Or when's the last time you heard of a vodka addict breaking into houses in order to support a vodka habit? And when's the last time you heard of two liquor store owners having a shootout over the best corner? What we have now is not a drug problem. What we have is a prohibition problem. There should be no law to prevent you from owning an object, whether it's a gun to protect yourself or drugs for whatever reason you wish. If there is no victim, there is no crime. As your president, I will federally decriminalize all drugs and encourage states to treat drug use as a health issue, not a criminal issue.
Yes.
We should allow the medical community to deal with substance abuse issues in a way that salvages lives instead of throwing them away. Accordingly, I will pardon anyone convicted at the federal level of victimless crimes.
Woo.
These are just a few steps toward ending the over-incarceration of people of color and letting consensual adult activities become safer and destigmatized. In addition to overcrowding our federal prisons, the war on drugs has negatively affected our communities and interactions that many people have with police. The drug war has single-handedly created gangs that police themselves, often through violence. Consequently, the federal government has created a police state, including the Drug Enforcement Agency, which spends about $3 billion of our tax dollars annually. They have repeatedly raided medical marijuana clinics in states where medical marijuana is completely legal. And unfortunately, long gone is the friendly local patrol officer who walks the beat and knows everyone by name. Instead, that police officer has been replaced by the federal government importing nameless, faceless SWAT teams that make Americans feel like enemy combatants in their own neighborhoods. And it doesn't stop with the DEA. In recent months, we've seen the Department of Homeland Security, which receives another $50 billion in tax dollars, patrolling our streets in military fatigues and armored cars. As your president, I will defund federal involvement in policing, including the DEA and DHS. That means ending the supplying of surplus military equipment like tanks and tear gas to over 8,000 federal, state, and local police forces. I will end no-knock raids, which too often end up killing innocent bystanders like Breonna Taylor. And, as Libertarian Congressman Justin Amash has brought up, when police do misbehave, it's nearly impossible to take legal action against police because of an arcane doctrine known as qualified immunity, which states that victims can only successfully sue an officer when a clear civil rights violation has already been established in a prior case. When I am president, I will end qualified immunity so that police are held to the same standard as everyone else. While millions of Americans have suffered from the government's war on drugs, almost every American has suffered from the COVID-19 pandemic in some way. South Korea confirmed its first coronavirus case within a day of ours and quickly jumped ahead in testing, containing the spread. As infections in the U.S. skyrocketed, South Korea nearly eradicated COVID-19, and they did it without any lockdowns. A testing initiative by Bill Gates was the first to roll out tests in the U.S. that could be conducted outside of the hospital system. Over the course of 10 weeks, they processed 20,000 tests, but on May 12th, the FDA stopped them from further testing and said it needed, quote unquote, further assessment. This is just one example of how the FDA has worsened the COVID-19 crisis and made it extremely difficult for anyone to get tested. Currently, only those companies with enough money and resources are even able to get FDA approval, and once they do, they weaponize their patents to hold a monopoly. It costs about $1 billion to bring a drug to market, and thanks to the FDA, about 10 years. Meanwhile, it's the patients who suffer, desperately waiting for drugs that just might save their lives. New medicines and procedures should get to patients as quickly and safely as possible. When I am your president, I will get rid of the efficacy requirement of the FDA, if not the FDA entirely.
Yeah.
The FDA isn't the only issue with the American healthcare system. Let's be honest, it's not working for anyone. And my heart breaks for the millions of Americans who've been left behind, those families bankrupted through the system. Now, for decades, we've had politicians in Washington tell us that it's the free market's fault, and that's why we need a single-payer system. Well, I have some news for them. We haven't had anything close to a free market in nearly a century, and the alternative to our current big government failure isn't an even bigger government failure. When I hear politicians say we need Medicare for all, what I'm hearing them say is we need VA hospital for all. And this top-down monopoly isn't acceptable for anyone, especially those who are willing to risk their lives for our country. We cannot wait for government bureaucrats to decide who lives and who dies. We must put control back into the hands of patients. As I see it, the biggest problem with our current healthcare system is that our health insurance isn't actually insurance at all. In any other industry, insurance only pays for the unexpected costs, and therefore costs are able to be held down. So imagine if your car insurance paid for gas, oil, and car washes. First of all, you would have absolutely no reason to go out and shop for the lowest gasoline price. In fact, you might go to the highest priced gas station because it's closer to you, and maybe it gives you free coffee while you wait, because all you do is you give them your little $5 copay. What do you care what the price is? Consequently, they don't work. Gas stations wouldn't work to compete to lower prices because they get paid no matter what. In fact, they could charge higher prices to the car insurance companies and you would never even know about it. Meanwhile, the car insurance companies would simply raise your premiums the following year. This is exactly what's been going on with the healthcare system. There's no reason for us as patients to go around shopping for prices, and so consequently, there's no reason for the healthcare providers to compete on price. Insurance companies can charge higher prices without any accountability, and we're the ones left footing the bill. The best example of how a free market system can work is in Singapore, which is similar, by the way, to the one in the state of Indiana for the employees. Now, in Singapore, prices are about a third of what they are in the United States. And in Indiana, they put healthcare dollars actually into the pockets of the employees to spend. The VA system could be converted to a system like the state of Indiana, in which veterans would be given control over their own healthcare dollars, and they would to decide how and where and when to use them. The government letdown of our soldiers doesn't begin with health care. It starts from the day they enlist. There are soldiers currently deployed who weren't even born when the War on Terror began. The U.S. military spends more than the next 8 countries combined in military spending. And we are in about 160 countries around the globe. And what do we have to show for it? In the last 20 years alone, over 500,000 people have died in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Pakistan, including 250,000 civilians. These are mothers and fathers, children and siblings who will never come home. In every election, our politicians promise more peace, but they only deliver more war. If I'm elected president, my very first official act will be to bring the troops home. I'm going to turn America into one giant Switzerland, armed and neutral. Our military must be trained to defend our shores, but we have to stop meddling in countries around the world, and we have to make peace with our neighbors.
Yes!
Unfortunately, the military budget is far from the only example of how the IRS has misdirected our economy. The IRS taxes Americans at every turn, and the tax system is so complicated that only those who can afford personal accountants and tax lawyers can even afford or can even navigate the system. And that same IRS that taxes us to death looks and probes into every personal financial decision we make, deciding how much we should pay. Meanwhile, the government itself accumulates more debt. Now, half the people in Washington want to increase domestic spending, while the other half want to increase military spending. So what's the bipartisan compromise? They simply want to increase all spending. As your president, my veto pen is going to need a lot of extra ink.
Yeah!
Runaway spending is also made possible by the Federal Reserve. When the federal government isn't able to raise taxes, it simply prints more money. And without any backing, the Fed has created, since the Fed was created over a century ago, the American dollar has lost 96% of its value. We should reduce regulations and allow cryptocurrency and any other form of currency to enter the market. As your president, I will first audit and then end the Federal Reserve.
Yeah! And the Fed!
I will eliminate the IRS and work with Congress towards eliminating the federal income tax altogether.
Yeah!
It's time to move money out of the government sector and back to the people who earned it. Politicians and bureaucrats don't know what you need. You do. And when it comes to cutting spending, we can't take any options off the table. I would encourage baseline budgeting, which instead of assuming an increase every year, starts at 0, and then we only add what's vital to there. It's time for the government to balance its checkbook the same way that American families do. Now, given the challenges we face as a country, it's easy to feel like the change I'm talking about just can't happen. But I believe it can because I believe in you. I believe in the individuals who make up our great country. I see America through my grandmother's eyes, a place where the rights of the individual are greater than the power of government, a place where liberty means maximum freedom and minimum government, a place where the American dream isn't a dream at all. It's real and it's right there in front of you because you made it happen. As I ask for your vote this November, I'm not asking for a vote for me. Instead, I think you should vote for you because you know best how to spend your money, you know best how to prioritize for your family, and you know best what's best for you. Thank you so much.